For the full information the Hazard Communication Standard entitles you to, you have to go beyond the label to the MSDS, the Material Safety Data Sheet. The chemical manufacturer or supplier has to provide the MSDS with the chemical it's making or selling. But if an employer mixes different chemicals together, then it has to make up its own MSDS for the mixture it's created. It has to give the product identity. A brand name or a code name or number is okay, as long as it's the same name or number that's on the label.
Now, don't be fooled by chemical family names, such as aromatic hydrocarbons. Sometimes hundreds of chemicals are in a chemical family, and the hazards of its members may vary widely. The chemical identity is also unacceptable if its name describes a chemical function, such as a plasticizer or a surfactant or a biocide. These tell you what the product does, but not what the product is.
The MSDS has to list the chemical's hazardous ingredients by their chemical names. That's important because it lets you check the chemical ingredients yourself to find out what the hazards really are. By every hazardous ingredient, the MSDS has to give the maximum safe exposure. If OSHA has set a permissible exposure limit, a PEL, it has to be listed. The MSDS doesn't have to list all the ingredients of the product, just the hazardous ones. And it doesn't have to say what percentage of each hazardous ingredient makes up the chemical. That's too bad, because if you know the percentages, you can figure out if all the ingredients have really been listed. And you have a right to be skeptical if a chemical company or your employer claims that their particular combination of chemicals isn't hazardous, so it doesn't need an MSDS.
It is very unlikely that a mixture of chemicals is going to qualify as being, quote, non-hazardous. The definition of what's hazardous is very broad under the standard. We've probably evaluated 100 MSDSs that claim that nothing in the mixture was hazardous, and in most cases we've been able, by hassling the supplying company, we've been able to get information on what's in it, and none of those claims have stood up. There's always been one hazardous ingredient in one of those mixtures. So employers, you know, are in most cases obligated to get that information under the standard, and even if they're not, they can still use the economic power they've got of refusing to buy the product unless they get good information.
Sometimes this part of the MSDS has the words confidential or proprietary information. That means that the chemical company considers the chemical identity, the exact chemicals that make up the product, a trade secret that they don't want their competitors to get a hold of. The company has to put their trade secret claim on the MSDS. They can't just leave the ingredients section blank or put NA. Trade secret or not, the chemical company still has to put the chemical characteristics, health effects, safe handling precautions, and protective procedures on the MSDS. Very few commercial chemical formulas are really trade secrets, but some companies make the claim anyway, and they've been doing it for years. Before the Hazard Communication Standard, organized labor fought trade secret claims before the NLRB, just as we now do before OSHA. You go back to the NLRB cases that Jamie talked about, and the 3M company, when the OCAW local went and asked the 3M company for the list of chemicals and all the information on the medical results from the exposed workers, the company claimed that every single chemical, I think it was hundreds of chemicals, every single chemical was a trade secret, and they couldn't reveal the chemical identities. And that was really the beginning of that whole fight to gain access under the NLRB. And the NLRB ruled that, in fact, everything couldn't be a trade secret, perhaps some things, but not all things. And now we have an OSHA standard which, again, limits the number of chemicals that employers can claim trade secret, or at least they're supposed to limit what they claim. Basically those things that, in fact, aren't known to their competitors, and also those things that can't be figured out through a standard chemical analysis. If you start seeing too many trade secret claims on MSDSs, get in touch with the chemical companies, either directly or through management, and make them justify their claims. The chemical company has to be prepared to tell doctors or nurses, any exposed worker, or a union representative what's in their chemical, trade secret or not, and right away if it's an emergency.
And I think that trying to get manufacturers to release their, in quotes, trade secrets is something that can be done. And you might have to do a few operations to get it done, sign confidentiality agreements and so on and so forth, but those things are well worth it. Unfortunately, the standard does state there are these things called trade secrets, And so consequently, we have to live with that. And while they may be a bunch of bull, they're still real.